Good morning and welcome to this online hearing of the Committee of Adjustment of the City of Ottawa under the Planning Act. This video conference is also live streaming on YouTube. With me are my fellow panel members, Jocelyn Chandler, Stephen Lewis, Terrence Otto, and Martin Vervoort. My name is Fabian Poulin, and I will be chairing this meeting today. The procedure for this hearing will be as follows. Listed on the agenda and appearing on the screen are applications we will hear today. For the sake of efficiency, the committee may deal with agenda items in a different order. Committee members have reviewed the planning reports and any written submissions in support or in opposition to each of the applications. Today, we'll hear oral submissions from any interested parties. Notice regarding minor variance applications, notwithstanding the pre-consultation with city staff, it is the responsibility of the applicant to identify all required variances accurately on the application to one, add a new variance or increase the extent of variance requested. It must be given in accordance with the Planning Act and may require the application to be recirculated for the next hearing date at a cost to the applicant at the prescribed rate. If an applicant amends their plans with no impact to the variances or to reduce the variances requested, recirculation may not be required. As part of the statutory notification requirements, each applicant was required to post a sign on the property and file a statutory declaration confirming the sign posting. This declaration must be on file today before we can hear the application. Without it, I may have to adjourn the application or administer an oath if necessary. Can the coordinator confirm that we have received all the statutory declarations?
No, we haven't received any statutory declarations.
Thank you. I will then administer the oath to each applicant. The committee may ask for a brief presentation of the application, followed by questions from members and submissions from the public. Please address your comments to the chair, starting with your name and spelling it if necessary, and your municipal address. The committee limits presentations to 5 minutes. Any exceptions will be at the discretion of the chair. Before we begin, we have 2 items of business to address. Does any member present need to declare an interest in any of the applications that are before us today or that are on the agenda of another committee panel? There are no declarations of interest. We also have to adopt the minutes of the last 2 public hearings. Those are the minutes of August 3rd and August 17th. I would like to ask for approval of minutes of August 3rd. All in favor, please raise your hands. And I note that Ms. Chandler was not available or was not present at the August 3rd or 17th. And so she is not voting. I'd like to ask the panel now for approval of August 17th minutes. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And Mr. Otto was not present at that meeting as well. So he did not vote. We will now hear the applications for this hearing and deal firstly with any items that may be adjourned. I believe we have 2 adjournment requests. Application number 2 having to do with 270 Low. And I believe Ms. Zander, are you available?
There we are. Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members.
Good morning, Ms. Zander. Are you in agreement with this adjournment request?
Yes, my client is in agreement with the adjournment request. There is a requirement for some additional hydro-G testing, and so the project hydrogeologist anticipates he will have that completed and resubmitted by the end of September. You can obviously confirm with your planner, but I think the planner indicated they needed about 3 weeks of lead time from there to get to the next hearing. So that will likely influence when this could come back to you.
Okay. So that would probably take us into November then, would you not think?
I think so, yes.
Okay. And Mr. Harrigan, do you have a preferred date? November 1st week of November or the 3rd week in November?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, we have no preference. As Mr. Zander indicated, if they can have the revised hydrogeological report done by the end of September, then the first hearing in November should be adequate. We're just looking for about 3 weeks because there's additional approval documents that have to be done in relation to the coach house application.
Okay. Just looking at dates here. So the first meeting in November is November the 2nd. Is that correct, Madam Coordinator? And do we have room? Madam Coordinator? Well, without their input, there you go.
Mr. Chair, November 2nd would be the hearing and there is space available.
Perfect. I'd like to ask the panel to adjourn this application until November the 2nd. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Your application is adjourned. Thank you very much, Ms. Zander.
Thank you.
Next item to be adjourned or with an adjournment request is item number 3. It's having to do with 4599 Mohrs Road. Mr. Polton, are you available? I see an attendee has raised their hand. Let me just see. Mr. Chow and Mr. Polton, are you available? Your hands are raised, but I don't see that you're on the screen here. Good morning, Mr. Chow. I can see your hands.
Hopefully I'm on your screen. Yes, I think I finally arrived.
Yeah, your hands are on the screen. Your face is not.
Oh, how do I fix that?
Move the camera.
Yeah.
There you go.
Wrong
Perfect.
camera is active right now. My apologies, Mr. Chair.
That's fine.
So I'll just change where I'm sitting.
Okay, very good. Are you in agreement with this adjournment request, Mr. Chow?
Mr. Chair, no, we are not in agreement with the adjournment request, and I'd like to make submissions on that and then request that the committee proceed with the application today.
Okay. And I'd like to ask then Mr. Harrigan if you've got some comments.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, as you may remember, an application for a minor variance was previously heard by the committee for the subject site to permit development within the required setback from mineral extraction lands. That application was adjourned a few times as we will provide an opportunity for the applicant to revise their mineral resource impact assessment, their MRIA report. They did not revise it through the initial submission, and the revisions that have been made to this submission really aren't substantial in any way. The largest revision is a call has been placed to the ministry to find information about the existing license for the pit operations, but other than that, no revisions have really been made. If Mr. Chow and Mr. Polton would like to go ahead with this, I believe that's their right to do so, but I just want to provide one last opportunity if they'd like to work with the planning department to revise the report. If not, they still have an opportunity to do so at the Ontario Land Tribunal, which does have a hearing scheduled for October as well, too,
For the same property.
for the same property.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chow?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just with respect to the staff request for an adjournment, just to confirm, I guess, what Mr. Harrigan has said to you, we first appeared before this committee with a similar application on May the 4th. At that time, staff raised concerns with the mineral resource impact assessment. We took the position at that time that the assessment was adequate, but we agreed to an adjournment to June the 1st to allow for some time to discuss with staff. We came back before the committee on June the 1st. We did not make any changes to the assessment. Staff continued to take the position that the assessment was inadequate, but we asked the committee to proceed with the application, and they did. You may recall that at that time, the application was refused by the committee on a split vote. A few of the members of the committee expressed concerns that we had not provided information with respect to the operation of the pits that are located across the Mohrs Road from the subject site. Following that decision, as indicated by Mr. Harrigan. We reached out to the Ministry of Northern Development, Mines, Natural Resources and Forestry to obtain as much information as we could with respect to the operation of those pits. Our client also went out to visit the site and documented truck movements from the existing operation and spoke to the operator of the pit. All of that information has been compiled for you in an addendum that has been provided in support of this modified application that's before you today. Staff continue to be extremely critical of the mineral resource impact assessment that we have prepared in support of the application, while at the same time, staff recommended to Agriculture Rural Affairs Committee and Council that they approve a zoning application to not just reduce, but eliminate the required setback from a residential use to a possible quarry site on Dwyer Hill Road. And we have provided the committee with that report. We forwarded that to the committee yesterday, but I would quote from that report, page 5, where it says the purpose of aggregate policies of the existing and new official plan are to ensure that no development will hinder mineral aggregate operations. Staff do not believe the development of the lot in this case will provide such hindrance. And then the report concludes that Planning, Real Estate, and Economic Development Department does not have concerns with this proposal, as it is consistent with the PPS, the city's existing official plan, the city's new official plan, and the zoning bylaw. What strikes us as unreasonable and inappropriate is that planning staff who are telling you today and have told us time and time again that our mineral resource impact assessment is inadequate, did not prepare a mineral resource impact assessment in support of that staff-initiated zoning amendment. So what concerns us is that staff are asking you to hold us to a much higher standard than they held themselves with respect to that report that went to ARAC and council this summer. Mr. Chair, members of committee, I think the staff position is unreasonable and unfair, and we'd ask you to please deal with our application today.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have any further comments, Mr. Harrigan?
I will deal with those comments during the actual presentation.
Okay, very well. I'd like to ask the panel for to proceed with this application. The applicant would like to proceed. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't if you'd like to be heard. All those in favor with hearing this application, please raise your hands. We will hear your application in order. Thank you very much, Mr. Chow. Mr. Polton.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to application number 1. Application number 1 has to do with 1622 Galletta Side Road. Jody Wells, are you available? I see your hand up, Ms. Wells. You're muted, ma'am. Or sir. Yes, you're still muted, Ms. Wells. There you go. Morning.
Mr. Wells, good morning.
Good morning. Sorry about that.
No problem.
I would like to administer an oath concerning the signposting on your property. Can I do that this morning?
Yes, please.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time? Do you swear?
Yes.
Thank you very much, sir. I know from the panel notes that both Planning and Conservation Authority and all other agencies do not have any concerns with respect to this application, but I do note that there are 7 conditions should this application be approved today. Are you in agreement with those conditions, sir?
Yes.
You were cutting out there. Could you repeat that?
I am.
Okay.
Yes,
perfect.
I am in agreement.
Thank you. So I then would like to ask the panel to approve this application with all 7 conditions. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Your application is approved, Mr. Wells. Thank you very much.
And thank you all.
You're welcome. So we'll now move on to application number 3. This has to do with 4599 Mohrs Road. Mr. Polton, Mr. Chow.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning, Mr. Polton. I would like to administer the oath concerning the sign posting on the property. Can you take that oath this morning?
My understanding is the owner of the property, John Wolodarsik, should be on the Zoom call to be able to take that oath.
Okay. I see a John. Good morning. Mr. Wodarski?
He appears to be on mute at the moment, Mr. Chair.
Agreed. There you go. Good morning.
Good morning. The pronunciation is Wolodarczyk.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries. The comment-
Can I administer the oath concerning the sign posting on your property today?
Absolutely.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time? Do you swear?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay. Mr. Chow and Mr. Polton,
So,
we have
Mr.
5
Chair,
minutes. We have 5 minutes, sir.
Mr. Chair, I just want to provide a brief comment before Mr. Polton gets into his presentation. I just want to explain why we're back before the committee this morning after the committee refused our application in June. As indicated by Mr. Harrigan, that decision has been appealed and a hearing has been scheduled for October. We have addressed, or we believe we've addressed, the concerns raised by committee members with respect to the pit operations to the best of our ability, given the limited amount of information that's been provided to us by the ministry. So we're asking the committee to consider our modified application in light of this additional information. We do not want to go to a hearing. A hearing could cost our client anywhere between $20,000 and $30,000 for a one-day hearing. We will withdraw our appeal of the committee's June 1st decision should the committee approve our application today. With that just quick introduction, if Mr. Polton will go ahead with his presentation on the application. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Good morning. So my name is Ryan Polton. I'm a planner at Novatech, and Novatech acted as agent on behalf of the owner to prepare and file this minor variance application. The first application that was filed was refused principally on a lack of information on the existing pit operations to the east of the property. As a result, we've revised the mineral aggregate resource impact assessment. And as well, we've written a new addendum to that report, including all of the information that's available on those existing pit operations. Next slide, please. So this is an air photo of the subject property. It is in a rural area in West Ottawa. It's on the west side of Mohrs Road. It's near the intersection of Mohrs Road and Riddledale Road. The surrounding rural uses are a mix of, there's a tree farm to the west, there's various agricultural fields, there's a few woodlots, and you can see in this air photo, there's the 2 properties that are licensed for pits to the east that have current pit operations. Next slide, please. So this is a slightly different air photo. It highlights the subject property. It shows the 2 pits, one at 252 Riddledale Road. The other pit is at 4556 Mohrs Road. And then it highlights vacant and residential properties that's along Mohrs Road. There's 3 existing detached dwellings on 3 different residential properties. As well, the property to the south is vacant, but it has approval to be able to develop with 2 detached dwellings. These are existing conditions surrounding the subject property and between the subject property and the existing pit at 4556 Mohrs Road. Next slide, please. So this slide shows licensed aggregate operations in the vicinity. The 2 we're concerned about are the 2 Class A pits. The one that's further north is the Riddledale Road Phase 3 pit that's in operation. The one to the south, which has frontage on Mohrs Road, is the Stanton pit operations plan. Next slide, please. So this shows the subject property, and it shows the Stanton pit, which is zoned for mineral extraction subzone 2, the ME2 zone. And you can see that zone extends into the center line of Mohrs Road off of the property. So it includes part of the road. And the zoning bylaw requires 150 meter setback from any ME2 zone. You can see the result of that on the 1 hectare subject property is that it severely limits the development envelope to a corner of the property when you take into account required setbacks, which is not appropriate for the development of a detached dwelling. Next slide, please. So this is our variance we're requesting. We're requesting a setback of 110 meters for a detached dwelling to an ME2 zone, whereas the zoning bylaw requires a minimum setback of 150 meters for a detached dwelling to an ME2 zone. Next slide, please. This is our minor variance sketch we provided with the application. It shows the proposed 110 meter setback from the zone. Again, the zone extends into Mohrs Road, so it's not even to the property that is licensed for a pit. And with that, I'd like to speak to the 4 tests under the Planning Act. First being the general intent and purpose of the official plan is maintained. So the subject property is designated agricultural resource area by the both 2003 and 2021 official plans. These designations permit a detached dwelling on a lot of record that has frontage on an existing public road. This describes the subject property as an existing lot of record with frontage along Mohrs Road. So a detached dwelling is permitted on the subject property. As well, the Stanton pit and the Riddledale Road pit, they're both zone mineral extraction, but they're both designated sand and gravel resource area and aggregates overlay on the 2003 official plan and 2021 official plan, respectively. And they use list criteria for the development of a detached dwelling on a lot in that designation. And the subject property would meet those criteria. Would the property be designated likewise? So ironically, because it's not sand and gravel, we're here requesting relief. We would still require relief from the ME2 zone with regard to the zoning, but the proposed detached dwelling would be permitted use on the property even if it was zoned sand and gravel resource area. As well,
Go ahead, Mr. Bolton, we'll continue.
Okay, as well, in section, sorry, just give me 1 second here.
Sure.
So section 5.3 of the 2003 official plan, policy 2, it very clearly states that irrespective of any other policy in the official plan, an individual has the right to develop a single detached dwelling on a lot of record fronting onto a public road. So it's very clear in the official plan that existing lots of record with frontage on public roads is intended to be developed with a detached dwelling. The proposed minor variance allows for an appropriate development envelope on this 1 hectare property. And so the proposed minor variance meets the intent and purpose of both the 2003 and 2021 official plans. The second test of minor variance is the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaws maintained. Next slide, please. So this is a slightly different air photo showing residential properties. The difference being that it shows the orange line. I'll explain that in 1 second. But firstly, The intent of the zoning bylaw and the setback from mineral extraction zones is to reduce conflict between pits and residential uses in rural areas. Now, there are provincial regulations that speak to the development of pits and quarries. These regulations include required setbacks from existing residential properties. They're not from residential dwellings, from properties. And so, as well as from roads. So a 30-meter setback is required by provincial regulation for any pit proposing to extract resources. And you can see that orange line on the ME2 zone is based on the Stanton Pit Operations Plan and the extent of mineral extraction planned for that pit. And you can see it respects a 30-meter setback from the right-of-way of Mohrs Road and from existing residential properties along Mohrs Road. And you can see that excavation is approximately 150 meters from our development envelope that we're proposing on the subject property that fully meets the intent of the zoning bylaw with regard to setbacks to make sure there's no conflict between detached dwellings and mineral extraction for pits. And so the proposed minor variance meets the intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw. The third test is that is it desirable or appropriate for the development of the land. And so this requested variance will permit an appropriate development envelope for a detached dwelling. It is on an existing lot of record, and the city's declared a housing emergency. And it's quite shocking that the city's trying to prevent the development of increasing a development envelope on the property to provide for an appropriate location for a detached dwelling on an existing lot of record with frontage on an existing public road. The properties along Mohrs Road is characterized by large residential lots with detached dwellings or approval for detached dwellings in proximity to an existing pit and an ME2 zone. As well, the subject property itself is 1 hectare. It's not viable for commercial agriculture. And so the proposed minor variance to increase the building envelope is appropriate for the development of the land. And then the fourth test I have is that, is it minor? Next slide, please. Oh, that's interesting. The formatting has been messed up. But what this figure shows is this is the operations plan for the Stanton pit. The Stanton pit's the closer of the two pits. You can see Mohrs Road along the west side, and you can see that orange line is the line, that's the dashed line, 30 meters from the right-of-way, as well as 30 meters from the existing residential property. So you can see they're not planning on extracting minerals near the road in the northwest corner, closest to the subject property. You can also see travel routes and accesses to the pit from Mohrs Road, as well as a way station that's planned. Next slide, please. So this is the Riddledale Road Phase 3 operations plan. And so along the northern line there, that is Riddledale Road. And you can see there's entrances and exits at different locations, as well as a way scale. And there's a path that leads from Riddledale Road south to the pit to the south. And both of these properties and their licenses are held in the same company name. In 2006, they were both acquired. And they're ran and operated together concurrently as detailed in the addendum to the Mineral Aggregate Resource Impact Assessment, as well as their operations. And so with regard to mineral extraction, we're 150 meters away from where it's planned to be extracted. With regard to trucking routes, there's Galletta Side Road to the north, and then there's, I can't remember this road name, to the south. There's 2 trucking roads north and south of the property. They'd be accessed from Riddledale Road and Mohrs Road from Riddledale Road going east and then north, and then from Mohrs Road going south. There is no reason for any truck traffic to cross the subject property or to use the intersection of Mohrs Road and Riddledale Road. So with regard to the requested variance, is it minor? It will not have any impact on the existing operations of the pits or the planned extraction. The proposed minor variance is minor. So my second last slide. Sorry, next slide, please. is for comparable development. And we did mention previously, and we provided some information on a zoning application at 6199 Dwyer Hill Road. And we just want to highlight how similar the properties are in their contexts. So for both properties, they're both existing vacant lots of record with access to existing public roads. Both properties are zoned and designated to permit a detached dwelling. This is an owner-initiated minor variance application, whereas the city initiated a rezoning of 6199 Dwyer Hill Road. Mohrs Road is adjacent to an ME2 zone with an existing sand and gravel pit, whereas for 6199 Dwyer Hill Road, it's adjacent to a mineral extraction subzone 1 zone that would permit the development of a quarry that typically uses blasting and crushing of aggregate materials. The setback required reflects this. For the ME2 zone, it's 150 meters that we're requesting relief for Mohrs Road, whereas the setback that would be required for Dwyer Hill Road is 210 meters. We've prepared a mineral aggregate resource impact assessment, and we've revised it, updated it because province changed regulations, and we made substantial updates to that mineral aggregate resource impact assessment on filing this application, reissued it, as well as wrote a lengthy addendum with all the information we could get on the existing pit operations to the east. Whereas city staff did not provide any mineral aggregate resource impact assessment in their application to rezone 6199 Dwyer Hill Road. And finally, city staff have significant concerns with our requested relief to reduce setback to 110 meters, whereas 150 meters required, whereas city planning staff recommended rezoning the property at 6199 Dwyer Hill Road to eliminate any required setback from any mineral extraction zone. So those are the two comparables with regard to the applications. Next slide, please. So I'd like to just conclude that the proposed minor variance at 4599 Mohrs Road, it meets the 4 tests under the Planning Act. The proposed minor variance and development envelope on the property will not hinder the existing nor planned mineral extraction of the Stanton pit or of the Riddledale Road Phase 3 pit. And the proposed minor variance represents good land use planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrigan. Would you like to make some comments?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I will try to keep this under 5 minutes, but if I do start to breach that timeline, just please let me know and I'll try to wrap it up for you. Before I begin, I'd just like to make 2 comments in terms to comparisons that were made. Mr. Polton mentioned that if the subject site had been zoned or designated with the aggregate overlay, a house would have been permitted. That's not fair to make that comparison at all. It's a completely different official plan policies, different considerations, different lot, fabric, potential, what's permitted. It's not fair whatsoever. It's like somebody making a justification for severances in agricultural lands that, well, if it was zoned for a countryside, it'd be permitted. It's not fair to make that comparison whatsoever. In terms of the zoning bylaw amendment that was passed for Upper Dwyer Hill, that is a different circumstance in this, and we can't use that as precedent to waive mineral resource impact assessments or just to permit blank minor variance without proper consideration for any property within that required setback. Those were different circumstances, different considerations, went through different processes. That was a full zoning bylaw amendment that did go through months of consultation with the councilors, with the planning department, with the director of long-range development and economic planning. It went through a rigorous process. And as they mentioned, Mr. Polton in his presentation, under section 5.3, you are permitted to develop a house on an existing lot of record. Well, that property, is it impossible to adhere to the setback? This property that we're talking about, you can adhere to the setback. So just wanted to address that quickly, that those are different. You can't use that as a blanket precedent to just waive the requirement for any proper consideration. The Planning Act, the provincial policy statement is clear that aggregate lands are one of the most protected lands within the province, right beside farmland and provincially significant wetlands. There is a lot of content within the PPS and our official plan which corresponds with the PPS protecting these lands. We have about 125 years of these aggregates set aside right now for the city of Ottawa to ensure that we have a cheap supply of building materials for cheap houses in the future. As Mr. Polton claimed, we are in a housing crisis right now, and we do need to make sure that we have cheap material close to development so that we don't significantly increase the amount of travel costs, shipping it over. One house does not compare to potentially hundreds or thousands of houses that could be built with these mineral aggregates. And to the comment about the extraction itself too, they really have not revised the report. Mr. Chown, in his initial comments from the previous application, said that he was unwilling to revise the report, and largely it has not been revised. Their argument is still fundamentally based on precedent when there is no precedent whatsoever. Their argument is that there is 3 houses located closer, so a 4th house makes no difference. The province has told us when we created our official plan, both the 2003 version has the policies in play that existing houses are a significant threat to current operations and future operations. So much so that if you add to that threat, those licenses can be revoked. They can be just not issued. They can be curtailed. There's a lot of stuff that can happen to this, and then we can potentially lose millions of cubic meters of aggregate lands for cheap housing. That's absolutely unacceptable, contradicts the provincial policy statement and the official plan. There is no precedent here. There isn't. And that's the entire argument that they rest in. Like if you look at the MRIA, for the hydrogeology comment, they make reference that there's 3 wells located closer, so there's no need to do any type of mitigation measures for the 4th well and its potential impact. We completely disagree with that. Actually, based on satellite imagery and the addendum that they provided, the current extraction is going below the water table. We have no idea if it's even impacting those existing wells, if the quality is starting to get bad at this point, or if they can potentially fix that. There's been no consideration for that at all. And I know what the applicants are going to say, well, what's the difference between a well being located 150 meters or within 120 or 110 meters? And it comes down to how the province interprets challenges to mineral aggregate licenses or potential expansion. Right now, if you are located more than 150 meters away as a dwelling, a lot of these cases just get thrown out by the OLT. So if you have a noise study and they do complain because they're 200 meters away, their house from the current extraction or the future extraction, and they appeal an aggregate license, more than likely they'll just be thrown out without merit because they're not within 150 meters. The more properties within 150 meters, the significance of the threat goes up a lot. I know I'm getting close to time, so I'll try and wrap this up. But right now, where they have the current extraction where it currently is, going south, there is still about 5 hectares of land and about 30 to 40 meters of depth of Class A resource of aggregate. This is absolutely fundamental that we have to preserve. This is an order by the provincial policy statement. This isn't us just making up random interpretations. This is clearly from the PPS, which is the minimum benchmark for development in all of Ontario. And they have placed such a high importance on protecting these aggregate lands. And right now, the only justification that they provided is precedent. And there is 0 precedent. At this point, that is a fundamental issue for the planning department. And we'd like to take that to the OLT because it is clearly supported by our official plan, both of them, the zoning bylaw, the provincial policy statement, any provincial guidelines that we've seen. There is nothing that says existing houses located closer can be used as justification. There is a massive amount of aggregate in this area that's been untouched. And just for reference, the lands to the north have been going on for more than 50 years of extraction below the water table, and they haven't even touched these lands. I know in the previous hearing, a member of the board made a comment that it was unlikely that the pit would expand to the south. This is 5 hectares. And again, this isn't 5 hectares going to the property boundary. This is if you take into account a 30-meter setback for the extraction itself too. And that still is 5 hectares. It's about 7 hectares if you don't take into the setback. And then in terms of just one more comment, Mr. Polton made a comment that extraction has to be 30 meters from any residential property. That may be accurate, but the pit license doesn't have to be. They can have the pit license located closer to the property boundary where they can have other operations associated with it. And that's the important part, is where the pit license and that boundary is, not the extraction. Because the physical extraction is just where you dig into it. The operation side it can go beyond the actual extraction. And there's been no thought that's given to this. They did a desktop review, they called the ministry, and they drove by the property. This is lands that are so highly protected. We would never accept this provincially significant wetlands. You go out, you do the survey, you evaluate what's there. This report needs to correctly identify what the concerns are to these aggregate lands, and then they need to address them. Saying that there are no concerns because there's precedent located closer, we can't accept that whatsoever. And this discussion has gone up through multiple planners, management, engineers. This is not something that we can never accept. And we are willing to go to the OLT, and we are prepared on October 20th to hear this at the OLT on those grounds.
Thank you, Mr. Harrigan.
Thank you.
All right, so now I'd like to proceed and ask the panel for any comments that may have. I'd like to ask Mr. Vervoort if you would like to start off.
I just wondered if Mr. Bolton first had any response to the submissions of the planning department.
Mr. Polton?
Mr. Chair, if I may. So let me start by acknowledging that Mr. Harrigan is clearly quite passionate about this in his submissions to the committee this morning, and I respect that. And let me be abundantly clear that there's no disagreement between us and city staff about the importance of protecting the resource. I don't, that Mr. Harrigan has implied in his passionate presentation to the committee that somehow this application and our submissions are going to compromise and jeopardize the resource across the road. And clearly it's our opinion that that simply is not the case. And I think what makes it why this isn't the case, as Mr. Harrigan has indicated, and as Mr. Polton indicated in his presentation, we're not talking about an application that would permit the addition of another house where a house isn't already permitted. So the whole discussion about the impact of another house is irrelevant to the application today. Both Mr. Harrigan and Mr. Polton have advised the committee that there is room on this property to build a house, but the location and the size of that area is totally inappropriate and not functional. So it's not, the effect of the application is not to allow a house where one isn't already permitted, is to allow a house to be more functionally and practically built on that property. And we're trying to maintain through the variance to make sure that that house is still located a reasonable distance away from the resource. So please don't get caught up in the emotion of adding another house. And with respect, our assessment goes far beyond this notion of precedent in terms of our assessment and analysis of the impact of the application. I think it does us disrespect by categorizing our impact assessment as simply dealing with precedent. I think that's unfair and inappropriate. But the bottom line, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, is a house is already allowed on that property. The purpose of this variance application is simply to allow for a more practical, buildable area on the property and maintain that appropriate separation distance from the resource area on the other side of Mohrs Road. Please bear in mind what the basic purpose of this application is. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harrigan, do you have any further comments?
Thank you. I just wanted to make two comments to that. Through you, Mr. Chair, the fundamental issue here is not whether we're building a house on this property, it's whether we're building a house within the required setback. And it has been abundantly clear to us that building within that setback has the significant capabilities to compromise current or future aggregate operations. That's exactly what we're talking about right here. They can build a house on this property at the corner of that lot. They could even do lot line adjustments if they wanted to get creative and turn something around and shape it in any way. But right now, we're not talking about whether we're permitting a house or not on this property. It's within the setback or not. And it is very clear based on OLT challenges that if you're within that 150-meter setback, it gives a lot of merit to the residents if they complain at any point in the future. And again, this is something that the province has told us we do have to protect here. Again, this is a very significant issue.
Just a moment, Mr. Chen. Go ahead, Mr. Harrigan.
Thank you. This is fairly significant issue. This is matter of provincial interest. We do have to protect this, and the proper considerations have not been given. To Mr. Chown's credit, he is correct that this application the MRIA is not solely based on aggregate extraction. Oh, sorry, it is not solely based on precedent. They do add in additional discussions, but those are, again, minor components. The fundamental element of the MRIA is precedent, and the other discussions that they have are insubstantial. They make comments about what's the proper trucking routes. Yes, those may be what the current trucking routes are right now, but the second it becomes economical for that aggregate extraction to move the trucking routes or its operations in any way, they will. Right away, they will go and they will do it because it's economical for them to do it. And then it becomes conflict. Like there hasn't been proper consideration for the concerns.
Okay, before I get to Mr. Chown, Mr. Harrigan, can you tell me, has there been any pit licenses revoked due to concerns of residents?
That part I can't tell you. It's not my area of expertise. The licenses themselves are handled by the province. So they get approval through the province itself. So we don't keep track of what licenses may have been curtailed, revoked, denied, just because we aren't privy to that information. But it was the province themselves who told us that, it was the MNR at the time who told us, their staff members, that they can be revoked, and it is a significant threat of them either being curtailed. They can cut down how much extraction they're allowed to do. They can completely revoke them. If they do come in for a new license, then that could be a point of major concern. And to that regard, something that the applicants provide in their addendum was what the license currently is. And this license, it actually does not have a license. It's under a grandfathering policy that does permit it. So it is our understanding and our belief that if multiple complaints are starting to reach this point, or there is a point of contention, there's no guarantee that grandfathering policy can stay in place. If they need a new license to have the operations expand south or to change their operations around, there's a lot more uncertainty with that grandfathering policy because they now have to update it to adhere to the current standards, and they could have a lot of difficulty if there is that conflict. We're not being unreasonable here. We're simply asking for a report that properly addresses the concerns that are on the site and makes the appropriate recommendations and mitigation measures. Their position is there are no concerns. And those houses located closer, those are a concern right away. The potential contamination of the well, that's a concern. Noise, they didn't provide a thorough, robust analysis of it, but even just including, like, there's berms there for noise already, that probably means noise isn't going to be a big of an issue, but they could include that discussion within the report themselves, just to say these are concerns, these are how they are addressed, these are how they are mitigated, and that's it. This is how we address every single technical report that's done for almost anything. And it just hasn't followed this correct procedure, this analysis.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Harrigan. Mr. Chown.
Just quickly on the trucking comment. We have to look at the roads on the ground. And Mr. Chair, I told the committee the first time we appeared, I lived there. I lived there for a number of years. My parents owned the property across the road for decades. I'm very, very familiar with this location. There is absolutely no reason in the world for trucks leaving either of those pits to go past this property. They will be destined either to the Galletta side road in the north, in which case they have to go exit onto Riddledale Road, go east to Loggers Way and north to the Galletta side road. They can't go the other way because there's a narrow bridge and a low overpass that won't accommodate the trucks. In the unusual circumstance that they're going south to the Kinburn side road, then they'll take the southerly exit and go south on Mohrs Road, and they'll never go past the property. We've looked at it, we've analyzed it. It's unfair for staff to say that we've just glossed over these other issues associated with a pit operation. We've looked at truck movements, we've looked at dust, we've looked at noise, we've assessed those things in our assessment. What I find incredible, Mr. Chair, is that staff are taking such an adamant position, objecting to a reduction of a setback from 150 meters to 110 meters from a sand pit when within the last 3 months, they recommended to planning and committee to ARAC and council that they eliminate the setback from a future quarry on Dwyer Hill Road. I find it incredible that they're taking such an adamant and strenuous position in opposition to this application when we believe that we have provided sufficient information for you to make a favorable decision on our application. And I apologize, Mr. Chair, this shouldn't turn into a debate back and forth between me and Mr. Harrigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chow. One last shot, Mr. Harrigan.
Thank you. I do agree with Mr. Chow. I apologize that this is turning into a debate, but I do thank him for his valuable comments because they do have a lot of valuable input to that. I just wanted to make 2 comments again quickly. The first just being with the trucking routes. Yes, I do agree with right now that those are the correct trucking routes, but my point was is as soon as it becomes economical to change them, they will. The weighing station that they currently have proposed for some time in the future, if at any point they want to extract underneath that, they're going to move the weighing station. They could move those trails, they can move the pathways, they can change them around. That's our point. It's just those things can change. And to go with that as well too, that is only one component of many different possible concerns that could exist here. And it's just focusing on the trucks themselves. What about potential well contamination? That could be a major concern as well.
Okay.
And in terms, again, to the zoning bylaw amendment that they're using as kind of precedent, that did go through an entirely different process. A zoning bylaw amendment is much more rigorous review, public consultation, development planning, different departments, reviewing that element to it. That application had months of consultation with the applicant, the counselor, the planning department, before an application was even submitted. And again, just to point out that section 5.3 says you can build a house on an existing lot of record. In that case, you could not adhere to that setback. In this case, you can adhere to that setback. And that's what it comes down to, is there's been no justification to go against the zoning bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Harrigan. Mr. Polton, then then the property owner.
Thank you. Just a couple comments in terms of what we've heard. So with respect to the province weighing in, we have not received any comments from the province or the ministry, Sean. Mr. Harrigan has on occasion expressed conversations city staff have had with the province with regard to mineral aggregate resources. We haven't seen any of these comments. As far as I know, panel hasn't received any of these comments. This is really just city staff saying how to interpret something. We've only got one agency providing comments against this application, and city staff. Second, they say, we've heard that with regard to the minor variance, that they continue to have significant concerns, but we haven't seen. We've heard of issues of groundwater and wells. The minor variance application does not prevent drilling a well outside of the 150-meter setback. All we're doing is asking for the development of a detached dwelling and an appropriate development envelope on the property. The well could be located in the development envelope. It could also not be. Additionally, there's suggestions of trucking routes could change and ignoring precedents as in residential properties that are existing today. Well, planning rationales are based on what's existing. They're based on the context of the site and whether it makes sense. That's how rationales are generally written. Our mineral aggregate resource impact assessment was based on terms of reference linked by the City of Ottawa. We're writing that report as required by city staff. And we thoroughly updated it because the province updated their Ontario regulations just after the first hearing. So we've rewritten it, we've taken another look at it, and we've written it as described as how we're supposed to write those reports from the province and how the city advises to write mineral aggregate resource impact assessment. It addresses all of the requirements that they speak to with regard to dust, noise, traffic. And so we feel we've written a strong rationale. At the same time, the zone extends into the right of way. It extends beyond the property. And I mean, if they're going to start talking about ignoring existing residential development, ignoring existing truck routes, do we ignore Mohrs Road? Do we have to consider closing Mohrs Road and extending the pit to extract those resources as well? Like, we have to look at existing context of the site, what's there today, what's planned as per the demonstration plan. We've got all the information on the existing pits that are available. And there are Ontario regulations that speak to expanding pits and what's required. If existing precedent didn't matter, then there wouldn't be setbacks from existing residential lots that are required 30 meters, same with roads. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Polton. Now, John, if you'd like to have the final word before I go to
Thank
the
you.
panel.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments. Mr. Harrigan is talking about expanding the pit to the south. It's expanding the pit. There's no impediment at all to expanding the pit to the south, and the extraction does not interfere with the existing dwellings that are there. Second point is that the pit to the north of Riddledale Road is already underwater. It's already hit the water table, and it has no bearing on the well water. And I mean, he's basing a lot of his arguments on shoulda, woulda, coulda. You know, I mean, sure, a well could be contaminated, but you drill another well. The other point I want to make is that housing is not an impediment. If the pits have a valuable resource, they can just buy the housing, tear it down, and it doesn't affect the amount of resource extracted at all, and the cost of the resource. I mean, if they're pulling out that much mineral resource out of there, the cost of tearing down a house or two is irrelevant. That's my points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. One last shot, Mr. Harrigan.
Thank you. That, as the owner just said, that is exactly what we've raising concerns with. If these resources are so valuable, they can buy out the houses fairly easily, and it does not cost them much. If you add in a fourth or a fifth house now, we're talking about $500,000, $1 million more. That is a conflict. And sorry, the one thing that I originally raised my hand for with Mr. Polton said about how planning rationales are written to address the current circumstances. In this case, it needs to address the current and the future. And I just exactly quoting out of the PPS right now, section 2.5, 2.4. Mineral aggregate operations shall be protected from development and activities that would preclude or hinder their expansion or continued use. This is straight from the PPS. They need to address what is currently there and what the potential future is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Harrigan. Mr. Chown, really, this has got to be the last one. Okay.
I promise this will be the last. I'll point out that once again, Mr. Harrigan has expressed concerns about the addition of a fourth or fifth house. That's not the nature of the application before you. The only other comment I want to make is just to remind the panel that the owner-operator of the pit has not expressed any concerns whatsoever with respect to this application. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Revort, would you like to make some comments?
Yes, just briefly. My opinion hasn't changed since the last time we heard this similar application. There's a lot of information, but I think ultimately you have to look at the context of the property and the proposed development. I believe there's a lot to the east that's also grandfathered, and I believe they can build one or two residences on that. But for me, really it comes down to whether or not the application meets the 4 tests under the Planning Act. And I believe that in the specific circumstances of this case, and given the context of the lot and the surrounding development and the activities, that the 4 tests are met. So I would be in favor of the application.
Thank you very much. Ms. Chandler, your comments.
Scrambling to get my thoughts together on this.
Do you want me to come back to you?
Would you please?
Yeah,
thank you.
No worries. Mr. Lewis.
Yeah, do I think this could work? Probably could work, but I see both sides have drew their line in the sand. I believe it's going to the OMB anyway. Let it go, or the land tribunal. We could go on here late into the evening, and I don't think we're going to accomplish anything.
Thank you. Mr. Otto?
Similar opinion to Mr. Lewis. No matter what we do today, it's going to be LPAT from what I'm told. So I would suggest we should just wait until I believe it's the 20th when they're going to LPAT and let smarter minds than mine make the decision.
Okay. I'll make my comments now ahead of Ms. Chandler. I'm still frustrated by the lack of completion of the MRIA. That should have been completed in the fullness of what the city required. It would have been that was the whole purpose of this request for adjournment, was to get a complete MRIA, and we don't have it. So my frustration is there. My position hasn't changed from the previous hearing. Ms. Chandler?
Okay. A lot of discussion, much of which I consider completely irrelevant to this application. I just want to make a few quick statements. One is I appreciate city staff reaching out to MNRF. I'm not sure what Mr. Poulton was implying in terms of them doing so. That MNRF staff are also available to applicants to call and ask questions. There were a couple statements about no licenses on these Quarry A and B. They do have licenses. They just don't have the normal process by which they got one. So they have licenses and they have site plans on them, which show what the extraction boundaries are, how deep they can go, and a limited amount of information, but enough to go on for this. And providing those plans to me was the major outstanding part of that MRIA, to be able to see and be able to evaluate what was supposed to happen on those lots. And definitely, as per Mr. Hagen's comments, they have more room to go. They don't need any other permits or any other licenses or anything else to continue their expansion of their pit operations towards Mohrs Road. Just a comment, you can't force people to sell their houses to expand a pit. Some people just like where they live. This applicant really wants to live on this property in a specific spot. That to me is an irrelevant comment. I am somewhat offended by the hyperbole brought forwards regarding housing emergencies, given this is a lot that there is a house that can be built on it. You just want to build it in a different place. To raise housing emergencies and preventing the construction of one house, to me, shouldn't enter into this conversation. I still state that the other houses in the area are irrelevant. And the reference to the decision by the ARAC committee regarding development on those other two lots near Dwyer Hill Road, it is interesting, and I think Stan provides some support for both sides. On one hand, it is a zoning bylaw amendment, so maybe a zoning bylaw amendment was the correct process by which you go through to do this. But on the other hand, there is no studies or anything that I could find on that report. That said, did staff support it? Well, staff were directed by ARAC to undertake that zoning bylaw amendment and put it before them. It wasn't something they came up with on their own. So 2 questions to the applicant. Did you reach out to West Carleton Sand and Gravel, or did you just speak to the guy at the booth operating the weigh station?
The answer to that question is that we spoke to the operator. We did not speak to the owner.
And the operator
just confirmed how much material they were hauling and the truck routes that they were using to bring that material out of the pit. I see the owner also has a comment.
To see engagement with the owner of the pit who has the investment in that land. I'm not sure why that wouldn't have been done. Did you consider a lot line adjustment to allow for, I thought that was an interesting idea, lot line adjustment to allow for more space on the property out of the setback from the mineral extraction area?
So first time that's been mentioned. And my initial reaction is, in my experience, the city actually opposes lot line adjustments that have the potential of taking land out of agricultural production, because the lot line adjustment would be to acquire land. I apologize for my phone ringing, would be to acquire land from the north, which is designated agricultural resource, and I think is actually used for agricultural purposes. So I can't see a lot line adjustment ever being supported by staff in these circumstances. I just would like to also say, I want to be clear that this matter does not necessarily have to end up at OLT. It can stop here today. And what I mean by that is, should the majority of the committee support the application, and I appreciate the majority, there are some members that don't, but should the majority of the committee support or approve the application, we will withdraw our appeal. The hearing in October will be canceled. There's a possibility, and staff have indicated that they may appeal your decision, but I would like to have that conversation with staff if you were to approve the application, because I find it difficult to believe that this particular application is so important that they would take our client to OLT if you approve the application. It is not a foregone conclusion that we're going to OLT. That's one of quite frankly, that's why we're here. We want to avoid a hearing if we can. We're hopeful that we will get a favorable decision, and then we're hopeful that staff will not appeal. But we will have that conversation with staff if you appeal the application. But it's not a foregone conclusion that we're going to OLT.
Okay. Ms.
So,
Chandler?
yeah, I mean, I agree. This is small change for the investment in time and resources, both for the applicant and the city with respect to going to the OLT. So my question goes back to Mr. Harrigan. Can you give me in bullet point form, with like no long thing, what in your opinion is missing out of the mineral resource impact assessment that has not been provided by Novatech at this point and could make a difference on this application?
In terms of what's missing, we just need more comprehensive analysis of what the potential risks are to this. So groundwater analysis, that could be one. Thorough discussion on noise could be justification. Our official plan says that a noise study is required for development within 300 meters. We don't believe it's required here, but just simply stating and including facts that berms cover up the potential noise, because those have been scientifically proven to help reduce noise of the operations. Further analysis that if the truck routes change, this is what potentially will be addressed. Or even just further analysis that says the truck routes, even if the entrances and private accesses to the pit, if those change, the truck route still will not change. An analysis of potential complaints that could be opposed against the pit themselves too. They do need to address in the MRIA that those existing houses are a concern to the pit. That has been our day one, right from the get-go, with every single MRIA that we've ever reviewed. We have never accepted that position because the province has told us we cannot accept that position. They need to address that and very clearly state that those houses are a concern. They need to have that in there as well too.
Okay, I have one more comment. Here's what I think is missing from the MRIA that would have been perhaps helpful for the applicant. There is a mineral resources zone north of Riddledale Road. I don't see a discussion regarding that in the mineral resource impact assessment, because the expansion of this pit, it is established that it is going to go towards Mohrs Road through the site plan. An application in the future could happen north of Riddle Road, which would actually be closer to the as of right location of the house. And for that reason, I can't support this application, because I think that MRI needed to go further and actually would have been helpful. That's all the comments I have.
Thank you very much. Now, well, I see that the owner of the property would like to say one more comment, and then I'm going to go to the panel and ask for their decision. John?
Yeah, just to comment on Ms. Chandler's comment, I stated just previously that the pit north of Riddledale Road is a small portion of a pit, and it's already underwater, so it's got limited extraction going on there. When I was looking at the traffic patterns, the only pit that was being drawn out of was the Stanton pits. And there actually are no weigh scales on either of those pits, so there's no on-site personnel. But that pit to the north of Riddledale is well, I think almost at the end of its life, because it borders on agricultural land, and it is large areas of water there.
Thank you, sir. Now I'd like to ask the panel. Sorry, Mr. Harrigan, really?
Sure. I just wanted to confirm the property that we're speaking to on Riddledale. I believe Member Chandler was talking about the property that's to the west of Riddledale, that's currently agricultural lands and vacant and is zoned MR, the mineral reserve lands. And I believe the owner, John, was mentioning the property that's east of Riddledale, which is already extracted and does have the licenses below the water table. So I just wanted to make that reference that there is land zoned to the west of Riddledale that is within 300 meters of the subject site that is permitted to have extraction in the future.
Thank you. Now, John, I see your hand up. I see your hand up, Ryan. I'm not going to recognize you. Okay. We've heard lots of this, and I don't think anything that's going to be added is going to change much as we go forward. So I'd like to ask now the panel for approval of this application. All those in favor, please raise your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hands. Your application is refused, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we're on to application number 4, having to do with 2625 Carp Road. Robert Tran, are you available? You're muted, sir. There you are. Good morning.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee.
Good morning. Can you take the oath concerning the signposting on the property today?
Yes, I can.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time? Do you swear?
I do.
Thank you very much. I note, the panel notes that all the agencies within the city have approved this application, or sorry, not approved. They have no concerns with this application. However, there are 3 conditions. Do you agree with these conditions, Mr. Tran?
Mr. Chair, we do not. My senior project manager, Greg Winters, is here to speak to those conditions.
Okay, Mr. Winters. Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of panel.
Good morning. So we think that you don't agree with all 3 of those conditions.
That's correct, Mr. Chair. So just for the record, my name is Greg Winters, and I am a urban planner, professional urban planner, and a director at Novatech and the manager on this project. So I supervised and worked with Mr. Tran on this application. The conditions that we're having issue with today are conditions number 2 and 3 in the staff report. So condition number 1 is pretty standard. It's, asking for a draft reference plan to be finalized and deposited. It's with respect to conditions number 2 that we think are unreasonable and we see them removed. Starting with number 3 first in an odd order, but it's somewhat a little easier, I think, for the committee to get its collective heads around, is that we provided some information last night to the City of Ottawa with respect to this condition. The condition today reads that we have to provide evidence that the proposed lot line adjustment doesn't conflict with the servicing of either lot. And in this case, we provided a graphic of the proposed lot line adjustment. It's actually part of the subdivision next door superimposed over the city of Ottawa's air photo, and you can clearly see from the information, and I'm hoping that the planner on the file, Mr. Kukokin, can confirm this from the email, that the lot line adjustment is well north of Mr. Kavanaugh's property, and actually it's in a wooded area, so there's no way that it could reasonably hold a septic system or well in that location, as well as the actual lot line adjustment itself, the parcel that would be added to the lands that are to be added to the lands to the north, which is the developing subdivision, are undeveloped at this point in time. The nearest house on the property is actually located probably about 485 meters north. So we believe we've already fulfilled this condition by providing the information to the city staff at this point in time, and we're hoping he can confirm this so that we could remove this condition.
Would you like me to go to Mr. Kukonen now, sir?
That'd be helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Kukonen?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, thank you. And yes, I have received your submission. Just to that regard, as mentioned in my email to you folks, this is a standard lot line adjustment condition that we impose on all lot line adjustments. And it is not meant to be onerous. And we would just like to see an approximate location of the existing septic tank and septic system in a sketch in relationship to the lot lines to ensure that they do not cross. That's all that we need to see. And that's all that we're looking for, sorry.
Just in response through the chair. So I understand that, and I understand that it is a condition, and it isn't that onerous to satisfy. We just believe that we actually did satisfy it because the lot line adjustment's clearly in a wooded area, and we just didn't think that we needed to go out and survey and spend the extra cost to survey the location of a septic system that's clearly evident from the air photos that it's could be nowhere near possible near to the lot line. So that's all we were asking. We were just saying, could we just take a reasonable approach to this rather than imposing a condition to survey the location and provide that evidence to the committee?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and in response, a surveyed sketch, sorry, and this may be my lack of clarification in my explanation. It could just be simply a hand-drawn sketch of the approximate septic location, and we just want to see where the owner knows where the septic system is, and then produce that in a hand-drawn sketch that is acceptable to be reviewed by our engineers.
Okay. So, Mr. Chair, on that, before you weigh in on the decision on that matter, I'd like to just speak as well to condition number 2. And we object to this condition on 2 reasons. Firstly, that the condition on the widened lands is to be added on the retained lands in this case, and on the proposed lot line adjustment lands. And we believe that it's redundant for a condition to be imposed on the lands that are going to be added to the subdivision to the north, because there already is a condition on record from the city staff and its approval for the subdivision to impose a condition for widening on those lands. So the minute these lands are added to the lands to the north, they will be subject to that. And in fact, we're showing the widening right now is block 91 on that draft 4M plan of subdivision that's before Sarah McCormick, who's the planner on the file. So to have it to impose a condition now to satisfy this condition, we would actually have to go back and ask the surveyor to add an extra part to this plan today, rather than just completing the lot line adjustment. What we would like to do is to see that we could just waive the requirement for the widening on the severed lands, on the portion to be added to the property to the north, because it's already addressed. The second part to this is we also object to the condition of having a widening on the retained lands. And this is largely because it was never discussed with Mr. Kavanaugh, and he's unrelated to the developer Kavanaugh construction. Mr. Kavanaugh was never discussed with him about a widening on the lands. And we think it's unreasonable to impose that condition on him at this point in time, because he's not actually proposing any development of his lands. He's reflective of the fact that Kavanaugh Developments to the north, through their plan of subdivision, looked at an alternative to moving the road location to provide access from Carp Road to their subdivision by moving it to the south. And the advantage of this is that the road would now be outside of the natural heritage setback for the watercourse of Huntley Creek. So everybody, including the MVC, has acknowledged that this is a good thing on the property. So Mr. Kavanaugh here is a willing contributor by allowing us to take some of his land to add to the lands to the north. So it's unsuspecting of him to be imposed now to have a condition on him. When we raised this with Ms. Conan, he responded last night in an email to us reflecting the new official plan and saying that lot line adjustments are development applications and therefore subject to this standard condition through the City of Ottawa. And as a professional planner, I somewhat object to this because the words about lot line adjustment are not included in the new official plan. The new official plan is not even in force at this point because it hasn't been approved by the province. But even so, if you read the definition of development that's listed on page 260 of the official plan, it says the construction in addition to buildings, changes or intensification in use, the addition of units on existing lands, the creation of new lots. And it goes on to say, development includes redevelopment, and for the purpose of the official plan to include planning applications under the Planning Act is required. So the issue I have here is nowhere in the language does it say lot line adjustments. And in fact, I've used the same argument with the Committee of Adjustment successfully in the past when they were trying on an application on Fernbank Road when we were applying for a similar lot line adjustment and the city staff were asking for an environmental impact study on the lands. We approached the planner in the file, who was also Sarah McCormick, who's a planner at the City of Ottawa at the time, and she agreed with us that a lot line adjustment is not a development application and therefore could not impose a condition for an environmental impact study. So we find that the approach here about asking for widenings on retained lands through a lot line adjustment is unreasonable in this case. You can imagine the precedent here that we'd be creating, that if you're applying it to all lot line adjustments, no matter how large or small they are throughout the City of Ottawa, it'd be a significant impact on the rural folk who are just trying to do something simple between two landowners. So we think it's unreasonable to impose this condition at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Winters. Mr. Kukkonen, any comments about the road widening?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I believe that previous conversation was in respect to our old official plan. These comments now fall under our new official plan. I can confirm that this is a consent application, albeit a lot line adjustment. Consent applications are development. Anything that requires an application under the Planning Act, is a development application. And also legal has confirmed that lot line adjustments are indeed development and therefore subject to road widenings.
Thank you. Just for your information, Mr. Winters, we've been told that they would appeal, that the city would appeal anyone that did not have the condition for road widening. Now, it's your choice whether you want to go forward to LPAT or not, but it's just, we've been notified that should this kind of road widening condition not be part of a approved application, that it will be appealed by the city. Okay, so yes.
May I just add one point to that? So I think there's a lot of evidence here that's being relied on the fact that legal opinion has been given that lot line adjustments. We don't have that information in front of us. What we have is a definition that's clear in the provincial policy statement in the City of Ottawa's official plan that it doesn't include the words lot line adjustment. So I think there's a misrepresentation here, accidentally or otherwise, to impose these conditions throughout the city. And the fact that legal staff are telling us that our only recourse is to take it up to the OLT is a fairly heavy-handed approach, I would have to say. So, I would like to offer that my colleague, Krista Libman, who's with Solways, is participating in this application, and she might have an opinion on this as well. Thank you.
Sure. Ms. Libman?
Yes, good morning. The only thing that I wanted to add was that in the transition policies under the new OP, specifically for consents, staff may impose the more stricter official plan policy. In instances recently before the committee, staff have chosen not to follow that provision and to not rely on the more stricter policies, and that's very much within their ability. Of course, we've seen many applications before the rural panel in the past where the road widening has not been taken over the retained lands. And in this instance, I would just sort of question the reasonableness of the road widening over the severed parcel, or rather the retained parcel. It's only a 69-meter width. The lands to the south are a cemetery, so it's very unlikely that a road widening will ever be taken over those lands. And for those reasons, in the current context, as Mr. Winters explained, there's no development proposed on this parcel. And so given the current context, I would suggest that the road widening is not reasonable and not appropriate over the retained lands.
Thank you, Ms. Libman. I'll now move on to the panel. I'm sure you're going to hear some sympathetic ears. Mr. Lewis, any comments?
Yeah, thank you. I support the application without conditions 2 or 3. I'm thankful that somebody has finally had the courage and stated over the road widening condition. So I support it without the road widening, and I don't believe the septic tank sketch by the owner is necessary. And one other thing, though, I'd like the committee to maybe send a memo to Novatech reminding them of the 5-minute rule. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Otto, any comments?
I agree with Mr. Lewis. I do believe that they've already met condition 3 with a sketch. So it could be waived, and definitely number 2, the road widening, I agree 100% with the applicant that it should not be proceeded with.
Thank you. Ms. Chandler?
Was this application circulated to MVCA in the Ottawa Septic System office? Because the condition regarding the sewage system, that's supposed to be reviewed by the Ottawa Septic System office and comments provided, because they generally can make a good call on whether that's something that needs to be looked into.
Mr. Winters, has it?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity to speak to this. So one of the things, just to address Ms. Chandler's comment about this, is we've noted that the MVCA has been circulated. They don't have an objection to this application, but they're looking at it from a natural heritage perspective and their watercourse regulations. We noted on a previous application that there was the assumption that the Ottawa Septic System office had been circulated on applications, and they weren't in these cases. In fact, it came to them as a surprise that they were even being asked to do that. So in this case, to my previous explanation, I don't think it's necessary in this case just because of the air photo that we've given. I think we've satisfied that requirement for a sketch at this point in time. Hopefully that answers your question, Ms. Chandler.
Yes, and I think the committee coordinator, could you please follow up? Those private servicing comments should be part of the review that's undertaken by the CAs through the septic system office, and it would be very helpful to have those comments included so that city staff didn't have to guess at it. That said, I'm inclined to agree with Mr. Winters that the septic system can't get very close to that line given the trees that are in the way. So I'll use my own judgment on that. The lot line, or sorry, the road widening, that's always up to the applicant whether they want to deal with it or not, and I will follow the lead of the other members of the committee on that.
Thank you. Mr. Revort?
Thank you. I agree with the comments from the other members of the committee.
Thank you. So I now would like to ask the panel for approval of this application without conditions number 2 and 3. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Your application is approved just with one lot line condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee members.
Moving on to application dealing with 7072 Flewellyn Road. Ms. Zander, are you available? Good morning again.
Good morning. Certainly some interesting discussion to follow.
Yes, I apologize for not considering your
good.
application a little earlier.
Okay, I learned a lot.
Okay. Just out of the abundance of caution, I'm going to ask you or the owner of the property to confirm the sign posting on the property. Do you have an owner?
Mr. Chair, my client is not here.
Okay.
This is not a case where there was a sign posted. This is a request to you to reconsider a condition related to a survey.
Okay, perfect. So to that end, would you like to proceed and give us your request?
Sure. So the committee approved this application back in July, I think it was, and in retaining a surveyor to complete the survey of the severed lot. This was a very large lot addition. I don't know if staff could possibly put up my severance sketch. It's still applicable. We determined that the cost of the survey for the severed parcel, which is a large lot addition, was pretty significant. And as you can see there, it does go through some wetlands on each side of the property. And so isn't that economical to survey such a large lot addition piece? Probably $5,000 more than just surveying what I've labeled there as the retained lot. And functionally, the retained lot is a lot that will have a house on it. And so there's some logic in surveying that instead of the lot addition piece. So the ask before you is to reconsider the wording of one of the conditions such that my client could survey the retained lot rather than the severed lot. Now, I did not receive the staff report until about 8:30 this morning and some emails that came after that. So I think the staff report from the planner was okay. I think the suggestion from city legal staff is that the severed lot still needs to be surveyed, but I haven't had an opportunity for any of the discussion since I just got those comments. In my mind, as long as the lawyer who's preparing the deed for the lot addition can come up with a sufficient legal description for the lot addition such that it can be described and consolidated with the lots to be enlarged that are shown on my sketch, that should be okay without a survey. And that's typically a save and accept description. So they would survey everything else in the lot, and then what's left would be the save and accept part. As I said, I haven't had time to discuss that with staff, so we can obviously have a discussion, but I'm going to request that the committee consider just adding some flexibility to condition number 4, so that if we can find a way to describe the lot addition parcel appropriately, then we could just survey the retained parcel. And so I'm looking for a bit of flexibility on condition number 4, rather than requiring a survey of the large lot addition parcel, or the parcel that was described as to be severed. So I hope that makes sense. Happy to discuss.
Thank you. Mr. Kokkonen?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you. And I would like to just take a minute to note that although I did produce the staff report, more information from legal services has come since then. And it is the opinion of legal services that the severed lands, the lands are being a registerable lot description needs to be produced for these lands to be conveyable. And it is required that they be surveyed to obtain that registerable description for the Ontario Land Registry. That is the advice that I've received from legal services, and therefore I express caution that if that is not done, that the conveyance of this land may not be able to be executed.
Okay, thank you. Thoughts, Ms. Sander?
Well, only that so Mr. Shipman is the surveyor on this, and you all know him well, I think. So his observation, and neither he nor I are lawyers, of course, is that if he surveys the retained parcel, he feels an adequate legal description can be created for the severed lot, which would enable the lot addition. Again, since we're kind of at the last minute of getting some staff and city legal comments very early this morning, again, if the committee is open to adding some flexibility to condition number 4, just to allow me to continue those discussions with staff. And if in the end it comes that they have to survey the severed lot, then so be it. I guess the alternative is to adjourn today and come back. But I'd rather just discuss with staff, and hopeful that you would just consider adding a bit of flexibility to the condition, and then we'll satisfy it as needed in a discussion with legal staff and my client's lawyer.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask for comments from the panel. Mr. Lewis?
Yeah, I've no problem. Why not make things easy and more affordable? I know Mr. Shipman, I got great faith in him, but I don't know, can we just let it, whatever works? If you can make it work, great. If not, go to plan B.
Thank you. Mr. Vervoort?
I agree with Mr. Lewis's comments. I think the whole issue revolves around whether or not they can come up with a registrable legal description, and that will be determined by the land registrar. But I'm sure that Ms. Zander will consult before she decides which parcel to survey. But I'm in favor of allowing the applicant that flexibility.
Thank you. Mr. Otto?
I agree with what's been said so far, that there should be some way of registering this, and if not, then it's going to fall apart anyways. I think save and accept probably would work, but again, I'm not legal, so I've had some dealings with land registry, and what you think is right turns out to be wrong. So build some flexibility into the decision and let them do their best.
Thank you. Ms. Chandler?
I am okay either way,
Thank you.
whatever works.
I would like to ask the panel to approve this amendment, that the amendment would be that the survey will be undertaken to provide a registerable description of the lot. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Your application or your amendment has been approved. Thank you, Ms. Zander.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. I believe that's it for today.